right, guys, today we're going to do a review of Unit. All right, first, a few important terms on the stories. Exposition, this is when the author introduces the theme, the settings, the character, and the story or the plot. The inciting incident is the incident that sets the events of the plot in motion, right? Rising action is the events that follow the inciting incident and lead up to the crisis. And the crisis is the major turning point for the main character, so something that happens that's going to change the outcome of the story. Okay, so this is, think of it as the main character going one direction, and now they're going to turn and go the other way. All right, the climax is the point at which the plot reaches its highest emotional intensity, so a really emotional part of the plot. Falling action is the results of the crisis, so that turning point all the way leading to the resolution. So kind of thinking going downhill now. And the resolution is the final outcome of the story and the last element of the plot. All right, so in Shago, a few things I want to point out. The tone is the author's attitude toward his subject or toward the reader. So the tone of the author towards Shago is very sympathetic. You can tell he admires Shago's skills at baseball and he feels really bad about how they responded to his blindness. All right, and then the tone of the author towards the bluff and the baseball is very nostalgic, right? These are very fond memories from his childhood. All right, the author's tone is going to affect his style. So if the author is very sarcastic, the reader may have trouble identifying with the story. Especially if you read a news article and the author is super sarcastic, you may just think that the author is kind of an angry or grumpy person, and you won't be convinced of what the author is saying. But if the author uses a gentle or sympathetic tone, then the reader's more likely to be convinced. All right, a little bit of symbolism in Shago. So when the storm is coming and the boys don't notice that the storm is coming, only Shago notices. It's a kind of a symbol where Shago is Shago's going blind, but the boys aren't noticing, right? And at the end of the story, it's dark and it's night, and Shago doesn't notice at all, right? Because he's completely blind now. So the night is a representation of Shago's blindness. All right, in the last lesson, the setting is a school in Alsace during a war between the French and the Prussians. The atmosphere or the mood created by the author is very sad and serious. So the author kind of creates this mood with the Prussian soldiers performing their drills, the crowd that's gathered around the bulletin board, and when France arrives at school, everything is really quiet and still, which is abnormal for his school. And then the point when the noon bell rings and you hear the Prussian soldiers' trumpets, this is a reminder for the students, kind of a symbol for them that they aren't going to be learning French anymore and they'll be doing their lessons in German from now on. All right, the Wild Duck's Nest, the exposition or the introduction of the theme, the settings, the characters, and the story is at the very beginning when they describe the valley and they introduce Colm. The author's tone in this story, his tone towards nature is sympathetic. You can see in his description of nature that he really loves nature, right? He describes it very beautifully. And the author's tone towards Colm is also sympathetic, right? Even though Colm makes a mistake by touching the eggs, you can tell that he regrets it instantly and he worries about it the rest of the story until the end, right? So the inciting incident in this story is when Colm first sees the duck, and that leads him to the duck's nest, right? So that's the inciting incident. The crisis is when Colm touches the duck's eggs and he regrets it, right? And that starts his problem, right? And the resolution is when Colm sees the second egg in the nest and realizes that the ducks didn't abandon the nest. Okay, Hasterman. The exposition in this story is the long introduction of Mr. Rybar. The rising action is when Mr. Rybar goes and asks about the value of his stones. The crisis is when Mr. Rybar finds out that the stones are worthless. The falling action is after that when he goes home and he throws out his stones. And the resolution is when Mr. Rybar's nephew tells him that the family They love him and they value him more than anything he owns, especially his stones. So the theme we see in this story is that relationships are more valuable than things. All right, you've got to learn the protagonist or main character in this story is Andy. The inciting incident is when the otters kill Andy's brother's dog. The rising action is when Andy starts to study the otters, right? He wants to kill the otters, so he's going out every day to learn more about them. The crisis is when Andy's viewpoint starts to change, right? He's studying the otters and he hasn't made a decision yet, but as he learns about them, he's starting to understand them better and he's feeling conflicted about whether or not he should kill them. The climax, or the highest emotional intensity, is when the otters fight with the lynx. The resolution of this story is when Andy decides not to kill the otters and he thinks his brother will be okay with that. This plays into the title. You've got to learn. Andy has to learn about nature in order to make a good choice, right? Once he understands the otters and why they kill, he's able to forgive them. All right, the conflict in this story, obviously Andy struggles internally with whether or not he should kill the otters. So normally he isn't the kind of person who just kills things. And so he, on one hand, feels like it's wrong, but he also feels like he needs to avenge his brother's dog, right? So he's having this internal struggle. And then externally, you've got Andy versus the otters, right? There's a disagreement, or even Andy versus his dad, right? His dad doesn't think he should kill the otters. He thinks he should. All right, evidence not seen. This story is set in a prison in Japan during World War II. I want to point out a little irony in this story. First of all, the title is very ironic, evidence not seen. Evidence or proof is usually something you can see, so it's strange to say that evidence is not seen. This plays into faith and the faith of the main character, right? Faith is not something you can see. Another point of irony in the story is when she asks God for one banana, but she starts to believe that it's impossible for God to give her a banana, and then God gives her nearly 100 bananas. This is very ironic. Okay, a memoir is similar to an autobiography. An autobiography is a story written by someone about themselves, and a memoir is a story about someone, often much shorter than an autobiography, and frequently just 1 or 2 episodes of a person's life rather than about their whole life. All right, poetry. If a poetry has 2 lines or rhymed pairs of poetic lines, this is called couplets. So if you have a poem that has couplets, you would the rhyme scheme would be AA, BB, CC, DD, like that. An allegory is a poem or story that has a deeper meaning. It has a literal and a figurative meaning. The most famous story that's an allegory is Pilgrim's Progress. The poem Symbols is an allegory, and it's comparing the way the author is angry about nature, and she gives up when it doesn't produce what she hopes, right? And in the same way, we often give up on other people when they disappoint us. God is different than us, though, and he's far more patient than we are with others. The sky is low, the clouds are mean. One thing I want to point out, this story has a lot of personification, and one example of that is the wind complains, right? And the author means here that the wind isn't actually complaining, but it's making a howling or moaning sound that sounds like complaining. An analogy is when you compare 2 things that are not similar, right? So some examples, in the sunset, the author compares the sun to a coin, and then he compares the setting sun, or the sun that has set, to an expired parking meter. And in Symbols, the author is comparing nature to people, saying that both have bad days. Sometimes we have kind of like depressing days, and nature sometimes is kind of gray and like stormy, right? All right, a pun is a joke using words that sound alike but have different meanings. So for example, Colossians 3:3, George Herbert uses the word sun, S-U-N, but he also means son, S-O-N, talking about Christ, right? All right, and a free verse poem is a poem without rhyme or meter. For example, sunset. Okay, so these poems will not have rhymes at the ending of the lines. All right, now, if a poem is rhyming and you need to know the rhyme scheme, this is how you look at it. So you're going to match up all the rhyming endings, right? So in The Clouds Are Low, the sky is mean, the first stanza, the sky is low, the clouds are mean. So you look at mean. Mean doesn't rhyme with anything, right? So it gets its own letter A. Snow rhymes with go, so both of those get a B. Rut, again, doesn't rhyme with anything, so it's C. So if I say, what is the rhyme scheme of this poem, you'll tell me A, B, C, B. All right, and in symbols, look at the endings, long, shower, flower, strong, hour, song. So long and strong and song rhyme, all of those get an A. Shower, flower, and hour rhyme, so they all get B. So you will have A, B, B, A, B, A. All right, I hope that helps. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks.